Hey everybody, thanks for tuning back into OTRAM's YouTube channel. Last week we did a video on how we do the pre-purchase inspection on an 80 series. So I figured we'd do the same for 100 series. We've got one in here for a post-purchase inspection. Like it seems all of them come in. I figured we'd show you some of the things we look out for when we're doing them and hopefully either save you money or give you some bargaining pointers when you're shopping for one. So we're going to start out here under the hood. And you just kind of, want to give it a general look over, make sure everything's in its place. We check the coolant, check the reservoir, but also check the radiator cap. This one's low in both the radiator and the reservoir, and that's probably due to leaking heater tees. But just check all the coolant hoses, and I don't know if you're gonna be able to see it on the camera, but like this upper radiator hose has staining. You can see it. There's some pink staining here from the coolant. And then if you come around back, the weak spot in the cooling system on the 100 series is these plastic heater tees. And you can see staining on all the joints here where they've been weeping. Pretty much anytime we drain the coolant on a 100 series, we replace the heater tees. It's really cheap insurance, so we just do them as a matter of course. You're gonna wanna check your engine oil. Make sure it's nice and clean looking, not sludgy. We just changed the oil in this one, so it's nice and clean. The early 100 series still have a dipstick, so you can check the trans fluid, make sure it's cherry red. It needs to be running and in Parker neutral to actually check the level. We've already done this one and it was good. The later 100 series doesn't have a trans dipstick. There's a whole procedure for checking the fluid, and you're not going to want to do that sitting in somebody's driveway. And look around. You're probably not going to end up taking the sight shield off. If you do, look underneath it. It's really common for all the mounting brackets for the airbox resonator to be broken off. It's not a huge deal. But it's something we see a lot of. This one's got the auto height control. So you'll want to, get in, run the suspension up and down, make sure it'll go through all of its modes. A lot of times they'll default and just stay in normal mode and they won't actually go up and down. So check that. You can't really see the fluid well in there to make sure that it's in good shape. Nobody ever flushes these, but it's a good idea if you're buying one and it's got AHC to go ahead and flush the fluid. These also get power steering leaks up here at the reservoir hoses, which you can see these are kind of sweating fluid. It's not leaking a lot, but usually you'll see a trail coming down there off the reservoir. Look at your lines. Like, I don't know if you guys can see it, but the lines in here are starting to get flaky with rust. So that's something to keep an eye out for. And then the 100 series has an electric brake master on it. There's no vacuum booster. There's an electric pump down here that fills up this accumulator that gives you power brakes. The power brakes, the ABS, everything's built into this unit. It is really expensive, and you'll want to make sure that it's not making any weird noises in the pump. And the easiest way to do that is to get in and with the key off, pump the brake pedal. And usually it takes 20 to 30 pumps. This one didn't take very many at all, but you'll feel the brake pedal go from being stiff to sinking. And then you can, what that's doing is draining the accumulator to force the pump to run when you turn the key back on. And then you can turn the key back on and listen for the pump to run. And normally it's a low humming noise. I don't know if you guys can hear it. And it'll cycle a couple of times. I want to say the manual says it should be done cycling within like 40 seconds. But that's just an easy way to see if there's a problem with the pump. They'll make a horrible squealing sound when they're starting to go bad when you first start it up. So that one cuts off relatively quickly. So I've got some faith that, at least for now, it's in decent shape. Go ahead and take the key out before I forget. And then, look over things like the battery. This one obviously needs a battery replacement, and more than likely it's going to need this terminal with all the fuzz on it. Not a deal breaker, but again, something you can use for a bargaining tip. And then you'll want to look at to see if there's a timing belt sticker. They're due every, I think it's 95,000 miles or 5 years. This one's not super legible, so it's not really helpful. But, if it's got a recent timing belt sticker, that's good. If it doesn't, you're in the ballpark of $1,100 to do a complete timing belt job on one of these, at least here in Virginia. So that's something to look out for. And then we'll rack this up and raise it up and show you underneath, and we'll be right back. Okay, so we've got this one back up in the air. Normally you're not going to be able to throw them in the air doing a pre-purchase inspection, but at least try to jack it up. You can see this one's got a decent amount of play in the wheel bearings. And then if you shake it side to side like this, I'm not sure if you're going to be able to see it or not, but there's some play in the steering rack bushings as well. Not a ton. That's probably not enough that you'd feel it going down the road. But, it's something to keep an eye on. This one, the rack boots are just starting to get moist. A lot of times you'll see them starting to drip from the rack boots, indicating that the steering rack seals are going bad. In which case you'd be looking at a replacement rack, which isn't cheap. And then looking up underneath of here, you just want to look for oil leaks coming down from the front of the engine, like the cam and crank seals. They'll come out this bottom weep hole down here. And then a lot of times on the hundreds, we see a leak coming down from the water pump weep hole. This one's not doing it, so I don't have any way of showing it to you, but it kind of comes down up above the oil filter housing. You'll see it come through. And then, just give a look over to the lines that are under here. Check them out. Look at your shocks to make sure they're not leaking. One of the ones in the rear is blown out. I think the driver's front on this one. The CV boots on 100 series, they all seem to leak here at the clamp. If they're just moist, I leave them alone, because by the time the cruisers come to see me, they're high enough mileage that it's really not cost effective just to reboot them. They're in the 150, 200,000 mile range. So rebooting them as opposed to just replacing the axle, it's a lot of work to put a Band-Aid on a high mileage axle. So we generally just put new axle assemblies in, but generally I wait until they make noise or the boots are actually torn. Look over, make sure your ball joints are still solid. Shake the wheel. These are tight, so I can't show it, but the upper bushings on the control arms will get loose, and you'll see play there. But yeah, and then we just come underneath. You know, look for any strange oil leaks, anything coming down. You know, check the front pinion seal, which I haven't actually seen a 100 series come in leaking. A big spot of rust on these is the passenger side sway bar mount. You're going to come around this way. Is the passenger side sway bar mount. The AC drain drips on them and rusts them out. So we see quite a few that the mount's completely rotted off. And then you just want to look around underneath, check the condition of the exhaust, the lines. Like these lines are starting to get pretty crusty. The exhaust pipes on this one don't look too terrible. When you get back to the muffler, I don't know if you can hear the parts rattling around inside of it. But it sounds terrible when the engine's running. So yeah, keep an eye on the exhaust. Check the U-joints for play. These were decent. You know, check the rear pinion flange. Look at the end of the axle housing and the insides of the wheels. The rear axle seals will go on these and leak gear oil through the rear bearing, and then it'll coat the parking brake, the rotor, the brake pads, and sling the inside of the wheel. And as the gear oil leaks out, it washes the grease out of the bearings. You got to do the seals, the bearings, the whole shebang. This one's got a blown rear shock. You can see it leaking fluid. So another thing to look out for. And then in the other video, and I think under the hood, I said, you know, just look for anything that's out of the ordinary, anything that looks strange. We're looking at this one, and we get back here, and who knows how long they've been there, but there's a set of hose pinch-off pliers on one of the fuel tank vent lines. Obviously, those shouldn't be there, and who knows how long they've been there. I'm amazed that it doesn't have a check engine light for that being on there. Another spot that the hundreds like to rust is this cross member right above the rear axle. It rusts out on the driver's side end. It starts rusting from the inside and coming through the bottom. So just look everywhere for rust. You know, check everything that you can see on the underside of the body, wheel wells, rocker panels. We're starting to see a lot of rust on 100 series. And then, you know, the dealer's probably not going to let you take the tires and wheels off, but you can look in through the spokes and make sure that the rotors aren't super chewed up, and you can kind of see the pad thickness, at least the outboard one, looking in through the spokes. So you can get kind of a good idea. Test drive it, see if the brake pulses, because like the 80 series, the 100 series likes to warp rotors, and you'll feel it in the pedal. But yeah, you know, other than that, give the body a good look over. If you can get it inside with someplace with fluorescent lights, it's easy because you can watch the reflection of the fluorescent lights in the panels. And as you move so that the fluorescent lights reflection moves, you can see any dents because it'll make a wiggle in the fluorescent light reflection. But yeah, so just give them a good once over. The big things we see on these are lack of maintenance on the timing belt, leaking heater tees, CV boots leaking, racks leaking, and then the exhaust rusting out. Oh, another biggie, and this one doesn't have it, so I didn't think of it. When the engine's cold and you first start it, listen for a ticking noise from the engine. The 4.7 is bad for cracking the exhaust manifolds, and you'll hear it as a loud tick when you start it up, but a lot of times as the engine warms, it'll expand enough that it closes the leak and you don't see it or don't hear it. So keep a listen for that on cold startup. The passenger side one isn't bad to do. The driver's side is not fun at all. So that's all I can think of that we mostly look for on 100 series. Hopefully this was helpful. Hopefully it saves you some money shopping. If you liked what you saw here, subscribe below, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.